So our team name, we thought it was very thematically appropriate, was the Hip Waiters. And we didn't do a sales analysis from Canadian Tires for this hackathon, but we assumed that they sold a lot of hip waders last May. So our team, we had a pretty big team, I guess, compared to the rest. It was myself, there was Sean, Natalie, Detang, Rihanna, Laura, Dirk, and Luan. And we had a really nice, diverse set of experience, so we were able to do a whole lot in one day. That said, we'd do more in 3 days or more in 3 months. So our idea that we came up with on day one was to support flood emergency analysis and response by trying to integrate all these different data sets from social media and from satellite imagery and from aerial photography, and try to integrate all of that data into some kind of prototype product or visualization that can help us to understand where it was flooded and when it was flooded, and maybe recommend some workflows that we could use going forward. So we do this kind of stuff operationally between, Natural Resources Canada, public safety. Some emergency responders want to know this kind of information, so it's nice to come up with some ideas. A quick overview of the data that we used. We used the flood polygons that we produced at NRCan. We got some Pleiades high-resolution optical data, CompSat 5 high-resolution SAR data, that's synthetic aperture radar for the folks at home. Transport Canada National Aerial Surveillance Program. These are oblique aerial photos that were taken as a special service during these floods. We found some drone videos on YouTube that are really high quality. There's also some CBC helicopter footage on YouTube. There's an amazing wealth of knowledge and information on YouTube, surprisingly. And the Twitter database we've got from the MongoDB, so again was scraped by the University of New Brunswick team that we can integrate with all of this. We've got the crowdsourced geographic information app that we developed at NRCan as a pilot project, so we got some photos from there. We ended up using some river gauge, stream gauge information from Environment Canada, who in turn got it from the conservation authorities or provinces who monitor that kind of thing. And we've got the spectrum data provided by the CRC. So we integrated all of that, at least we tried to, using Google Earth, QGIS, ArcGIS Online. I mentioned MongoDB already. So let's kind of just explore some of that data. So the first thing we did as part of our plan was just look at all this stuff and see what we've got. So we, as a visualization to show you guys, I'm going to zoom in on that little rectangle right there in Gatineau, and that's one of the areas that was affected by the floods. And you can see in the high-resolution optical image that all of this information, all of those streets there that are appearing in dark green are the same color as the river because they are flooded by that river. And all of those homes have been affected. So what does that look like in SAR? Well, if you like SAR, it's still not very pretty because in urban areas it's really difficult to monitor open water just because of the way the radar reflects off of the houses and trees and all of the objects in an urban environment is very different from the way it interacts in the rural area. So in the park, we can see that it's nice and dark and easy to map the flooded area, but in the urban area, it's just not dark. It just doesn't look very flooded in the SAR. Again, going back to the optical, well, that's great that you can see where the flood water is, but water can be difficult to detect unless you have the right bands in optical. You can also see the clouds in the top left of the screen there. We got lucky on this shot. And we didn't have anything from the day before, and we didn't have anything from the day after because it was totally cloudy. So all these different sensors have their drawbacks. So we want to see if we can integrate more data to fill in some of these gaps. These are great photos that Transport Canada provided us. These are oblique photos taken from an aircraft that's usually meant for looking for oil slicks on the water. And they use their basic Nikon SLR cameras to just take pictures from the aircraft. These aren't geocoded, they're not geo-referenced. We can't just import this information into a GIS. But you can sure look at that and see what's flooded. So what we did, we split up into 3 groups. and we each took one little area, and we took these aerial photos, and we got Google Earth, and we had them side by side on a tiny little laptop screen, and we identified which houses we thought looked flooded. And it actually sounds easy, but once you get into the boundary, you see, okay, well, the street is flooded up to this line. I can see that the street is dark. Well, how deep is that water? And is the house right there flooded, or is it okay? And, okay, well, this house is flooded, but what about the house next to it? So there's some really tricky decisions to make, despite having really good data. So we found over 400 buildings affected, and that was just in a couple of hours in the morning. We finished that by lunch. So I was surprised how quickly we could come up with that kind of information with such a small team. But that really showed how useful those aerial photos were. So to integrate some more data layers, we've got all these roads and water bodies from GeoBase. That's the CanVec series of data, which is available to anybody. It's open, and it's extremely useful. It's very accurate, and it really shows context for any other sort of data layers you're bringing in. So we've got the 100-year floodplains from the city of Gatineau that can be shown in red there, in red there, and these are extremely detailed. They're surveyed on the ground. There's people out there who are measuring historical floods, who are measuring elevation at very, very fine contours. And we thought it was amazing how closely those lined up with our pins and where it flooded to. This is the RadarSat-2 polygons that was extracted from the RadarSat-2 data during the crisis. And you can see that in the park area, no problem. We understood that that was flooded, but we just didn't have enough information to map that suburban area that was flooded. So that's a shortcoming of SAR, is that we can't really get those high-res or get those urban areas to understand when they're flooded. So can we fill in the gaps with those yellow points, those pins we dropped from Google Earth? Yeah, it kind of looks like we can. Compared to the optical image from Pleiades, I did kind of an experimental polygon extraction there in blue. And so yeah, we found the streets. We can see when the streets are flooded, but then it's difficult to tell when the actual homes are flooded as well. I mean, maybe we could sort of fill in the areas, maybe we could do a buffer of that to determine which houses are affected. So that it could be a useful tool, and you can get those suburban areas a little better than SAR. But that said, it's only when it's cloud-free, it's only when you can afford the data, only when you can get the data fast enough. So it's always got its limitations. Another data set that we found really interesting was these the flood levels, so the changes in the vertical flood level compared to the horizontal extent of that flood. So these are two of the aerial photos from May 8th and May 10th, and if you look closely, you can see that there's a parking lot in the left that's totally flooded that looks pretty dry on the 10th. And that's because the water dropped about 20 centimeters in those 2 days. And areas started to dry out. And of course, the flooding went up even faster than that. So it's really interesting to see how a change in 20 centimeters vertically can result in dozens of meters horizontally, and how fast that changes. So the more data you have, the more frequently you have the data, the better a job you can do of tracking where the floodwaters are and who's affected. I want to show you an example of some of the YouTube videos we found. Now this one is from the CBC, so they actually had permission to fly their aircraft. But there's a lot of people who just went out and flew drones, whether or not they had any permits or permission to do so. But you can see that these homes are flooded, and we don't have any kind of geographic information here, but you can pick up the context pretty easily just looking at these bridges. Looking at, there's that red and yellow home. We can tag that and figure out where the rest of them are in relation to them. There's a lot of information. You can even just pause, take a screenshot, load it into next to Google Earth, drop a pin, and say, okay, well, this building is flooded, that building's flooded, looks like this one's okay. So there's a lot of information that humans can extract from this. So it makes me think that maybe someday down the road an AI could do the same thing. You just feed it a whole video, it will automatically find these buildings that are distinctive and map the entire flooded area. That was longer than a one-day project, though. We also looked at some social media data and found that there was a whole lot of tweets during that event, and they were all located right in the middle of downtown Ottawa, which we know isn't true. It wasn't flooded there. So I don't know if it was our data set, our database, or the way the Twitter aggregates data, but all these geotagged tweets were really useful visually, but the geospatial information that's associated with them was too coarse. So they're all grouped together, and we can't determine just based on the geotag where they were even taking the photos. Again, unless you can extract some kind of visual place mark that you can identify. That said, there's some great photos. So people are posting photos of their flooded forests, of these raging rivers. You've got all these sandbagging efforts to try to keep people's patios dry. Just searching the hashtags can show a whole lot of information, and it's just a little trickier to integrate unless you have that really precise information. Also, when you search this sort of event where you've got flooding in Quebec and Ontario at the same time, you have to search in French as well. So, searching those kind of hashtags. We found a lot of franglais as well, like you have a French post with an English hashtag or an English post with some French hashtags. So you have to be really broad in your searches when you're searching in a bilingual area. So this kind of made me think that there's more value to this CGI app than more that we could use because of the precise social geographic information. So NRCan developed an app in combination with Esri helped us out to fill out a survey, take a photo, and upload the data either from the field where you are, or maybe if you're out of Wi-Fi area when you get home, and it will save the exact time you filled it out, exact location where you were, and if your phone has a compass, even just the way you were pointing, and that could be uploaded. And during the floods last year, we had a few users that were included in the beta go out there and take some photos, and these are really precise geographic locations because they've explicitly agreed to share that with us. Not everybody on Twitter wants to know exactly where they are all the time, and I understand that. But if you've got this NRCan app, you're out there for a reason. You're out there to take floods for the photo, for us to use to help map the floods. So I think this has a lot of promise if we can expand this to a broader audience and sort of automate some of the administrative tasks that go along with it, like confirming that it really is a picture of a flood and not just somebody's personal photos that they're uploading. Another set of data that we looked at was the CRC spectrum data, just because we had it. And we thought it would be cool to see if there was a spike in the frequencies that are used for the fire station radios or the emergency response. And we saw there was a higher usage on that day. This is through the day from midnight until midnight. I don't really understand this drop around dinner time. Maybe everybody just gets off the radios and has a break to eat some dinner. But this red line is on May 8th, which is the peak of the flood. And these two lines are just the first and last, or rather the first and the 23rd day of the month that shouldn't have had any sort of thing major going on. So yeah, we thought it was interesting that there was higher usage that day, but I don't know if we got any advanced analysis out of it, but we thought we'd look at that data anyway. So some lessons learned of the data sets that we use. These aerial photos, I think, were surprisingly useful. They were really great for being able to extract exact locations of houses that were affected, but it was a lot of manual labor. So if we could find a way to automate any of that, it would be even more useful. Twitter and Instagram could have been useful, but those geographic locations are just too clustered. So if we were able to access better geotag locations, maybe directly through Twitter or directly through Instagram, maybe they could provide that in a case of emergency, it would be more useful. Drones or helicopter videos, very useful for understanding the extent, and these people are uploading it the exact same day they fly their drone or fly in the helicopter. There's news agencies that are putting it on the 6 o'clock news in the evening. There's a whole lot of information there, but again, it's a very manual extraction of that information. If we could increase the automation or get some kind of geographic information added to that, it'll help a whole lot. CRC spectrum data, we needed way more than one day to get really deeply into that. I think it would have been really interesting to see a total plot over the month of different channels. There's really cool information there, but again, it takes some really in-depth analysis. Our results, so we found that combining all these different data sources, we could identify, over 400 houses that were affected by the flood, and that was close to the 500 number that the city of Gatineau provided as to the number of homes affected. We were able to just show that. We used QGIS to make all these maps. We were able to upload these points into ArcGIS online. There's a lot of ways we can share and distribute this sort of information. And there's a lot of information we can get through publicly accessible platforms like YouTube or Twitter or that sort of thing. So we were able to identify these houses, and this workflow could work. It didn't take us that long for 6 people to identify these 400 points. We could probably do that every single day in an emergency if we had a dedicated team of people doing it. And of course, if we had AI doing it, we could do it real time. And one more experience we had was that this whole hackathon, that's bringing together people with diverse experiences, backgrounds, and data sets, it works to think of ideas that you might never have thought of before, and to try out things you wouldn't have just tried on your own. So I want to thank our team, and I want to thank everybody for being here for making that kind of experiment possible. So thanks a lot.